People who live on the street have really difficult lives. These are stories or videos that we're posting, but for these people, it's their lives. This is their home. If I came to your place, I wouldn't just walk into the house without your permission.
Not everybody thinks about it as it's their home, but it's the only space they have, and you have to respect that.
A lot of times when journalists are out doing stories, we're really focused on our deadline, but we need to realize that these people are trying to survive. And so sometimes number one is not sitting down with me for an interview.
Homeless, unhoused, or people experiencing homelessness?
Homeless. My headline is always going to be homeless. This is what I was born to do. This is where I've had the most impact, even when it's uncomfortable. Sometimes that's just by being really annoying at a press conference.
This podcast has Lisa Halverstadt, the senior investigative reporter from The Voice of San Diego. This podcast is so important because Lisa is one of the best journalists, if not the best, covering homelessness. And she talks about why it's so important to have the voice of homeless people in every story. Hey, everybody. I'm here with one of my favorite journalists talking about one of our favorite conversations because we talk about this a lot. This is Lisa Halverstadt, and she is the senior investigative reporter for The Voice of San Diego. And you mostly cover homelessness, correct?
Yes, homelessness and a lot of behavioral health coverage as well.
So homelessness and related topics.
Yes.
A year ago, maybe not quite a year ago, you reached out to me when I was in San Diego and we met, and you wanted to do something to help teach journalists how to better report on homelessness and why it's so important to include the voice of people with lived experience. So I think that's a great place to start. In your professional opinion, because you include the voice of homeless or formerly homeless people, or, people that are connected to whatever you're reporting on. Why? I mean, that's, not everybody does that. Why is it important?
I mean, I think if you're writing about any community, you're not doing a good job unless you're talking to that community. And I do see a lot of times that there are stories about homelessness that don't include interviews or even perspectives from people who are homeless. And I really think it does a disservice to readers and to homeless people. And you're not getting the whole story. If you're not talking to people experiencing something, I often give the example as if I was talking about something that's happening in a particular neighborhood of San Diego or any other community, and I didn't actually talk to the people in the community who were upset or protesting. Everyone would rightfully be what's going on there? But we don't seem to have the same approach with homelessness. A lot of times, the journalism doesn't include the perspectives of homeless people. And like I said, that actually, in my mind, makes those stories less accurate, less complete, less revealing and accurate about what's actually going on.
But it's like an added step. Oh my gosh, trying to connect with people that are going through some kind of trauma or mental illness or addiction, or just are not able to charge their phone to continue to contact with them. So what are your tips and tricks for engaging with people that are going through challenges and living on the street without a home?
It is tough, especially now when it gets rainy, like it has been in San Diego recently, or there are police enforcement changes and people relocate. Historically, what I've done is I have found some people that are good at keeping their phones charged, and I will use them to help me stay in touch with them and also other people around them. So I might say, hey, Heather, I'm going to be coming down. Is so-and-so around? Can you tell them that I might want to be coming? And I mentioned Heather because there is a woman, Mama Heather, who lived just on the outskirts of downtown for a couple years. I would stay in touch with her. And she was so good at keeping her phone charged. I don't know how she did it. It was so impressive. For folks that don't, you kind of just have to figure out their routines and where you might find them. And that can be really touch and go because maybe they do have a usual routine, but today they've got a doctor's appointment. But I think it comes down to when you're writing about homeless people, like a lot of vulnerable communities, you have to learn a little bit more about them than you might learn about a typical source. Like you might need to learn, do they do recycling every Wednesday? Or, maybe are they going to get food at a certain place on Tuesdays? And that might be a good touch point to get in touch.
One of my first learning experiences was I was going through Chicago many years ago. Twitter at the time was mostly like an SMS. You did it through text messaging. There was the app, but a lot of people use text messaging. And all of a sudden there was a tweet from a homeless woman that said, "Hey, would you like to get together?" And I'm like, homeless people on social media?
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you brought this up.
And I'm responding to her and she's not responding. And I'm responding. And it gets to be the next day. And I'm like, I really want to meet this woman. And she finally responds. And I'm like, where were you? I don't think I said it like that, but it was, how come you disappeared? And she didn't have internet access, right? She wasn't able to charge her phone. She had to wait until she got to the library, which also you have to sign up and it only gives you a little bit of access. And that's when I learned how challenging it can be for homeless people to stay connected to the world, to us.
Definitely. Well, and I would say actually social media has been really helpful to me because there are some people that for whatever reason, whatever device they have, they might be able to keep their Facebook account or their Twitter account. Even if the phone's down, like they can go to the library, like you said, or maybe somebody gives them their tablet for a few minutes and they log in. And I've had people too contact me like when they're in the hospital, that might be a time that they're able to charge. And so maybe they don't have my phone number saved, but they can find me on social media. So that is something that, I try to keep tabs on pretty carefully too, because I'll get messages too a lot of times from people that I don't follow or friend because this person's created a new account. So that's something I've got to watch for. But it's definitely, it's a bit of work, but I think ultimately it's worth it because it makes the coverage so much better. To put in that effort. You connected to communities. Yes. It's like Kate Cagle, who we also interviewed, shared how she has relationships with mutual aid groups and, nonprofits and advocates. And that's how she mostly connects to stories. Yeah, I think that's a really great point too, because I do have a lot of different types of advocates that I'm in touch with who kind of are eyes and ears for me sometimes and will say, oh, you've got to talk to this person. Sometimes service providers too will say, hey, there's this person that I think really would like to talk to a reporter. So there are a lot of people that help with that too, or even just say, you're welcome to meet up here. That's fine if you want to do an interview here at, our location. Now, you're text-based, you're not video, often a photography component to this, but it's a little different than asking somebody to be on camera. What are your, advice, tips, tricks to make people feel comfortable, to maybe help protect them, to get the story that you need, but do it in a way that's authentic? You're in that homeless camp, you're in front of somebody's tent, and it could be a challenging environment. They could be going through some issues. Tell me how you get the story. Well, first off, I'll go back to the previous point because I think they're interrelated. Some of my best folks that I've met were introduced by someone else. And so I didn't walk up to that tent by myself, or the person had kind of said, hey, Lisa's going to be coming around. She's legit. She's not trying to hurt you. If you don't feel comfortable, just tell her that. She'll understand. So I think that can be just solid gold sometimes when you have an introduction. The other thing is when I do go out, say that I'm going and walking around tent camps, like you said, I'll walk up first and I'll just be really open first about who I am. So I'll say, I'm Lisa and I'm a reporter and here's what I'm trying to do. And I'm very transparent about the story. I may not go into great detail, but I might say, I'm trying to do a story today about police enforcement. I'm happy to have a conversation and just talk first. Sometimes people have a lot of questions for me, as you might imagine, and they will question if I'm really with the media. So I would recommend, especially if you're new to writing about homelessness and people don't know you in the community, bringing some kind of identification badge with you. One thing I have found sometimes is when enforcement has been up, people have worried that I'm a police officer. And so I've made an effort to actually display that press badge so people can see that and know that I'm not like an undercover or something. I'm very cognizant of like that this is their home. So you wouldn't just walk into somebody else's, like if I came to your place, I wouldn't just like walk into the house without your permission. So I'll kind of figure out like, do they want to sit outside of the tent? I also will be cognizant, is there someone else in the tent that maybe is trying to sleep? Would it be helpful for us to go sit over here instead? Or maybe there's some activity that's kind of making them uncomfortable too. Sometimes I'll look at the situation and I'll say, you know what, is now the right time? Or would it be better if I came back later? I can go talk to some other people so you can do what you need to do. Like maybe they, were in the middle of cleaning up their tent during an abatement or something. That's what they call them in San Diego, the homeless sweeps. You need to be cognizant that this person has a lot going on. And I will say, I want to really emphasize that too. Like a lot of times when journalists are out doing stories, we're really focused on our deadline and what we have to do. But we need to realize that these people are trying to survive. And so sometimes number one is not sitting down with me for an interview. Sometimes number one is this person has their shot to get food today and they want to do that first. And maybe I walk with them and talk to them while they go get their food. Or, hey, the police have said that they need to clear this area in a certain amount of time. I'm going to talk to them while they're cleaning up, and I'm going to make sure to stay out of the way when they need to do something. Or if I'm just going to be a total distraction and I can tell they can't multitask, I'll say, why don't I come back after you've crossed the street or whatever. So I think it's a little bit about self-awareness and just kind of that, I think the same approach that we'd probably take with anyone, but I think sometimes it's just harder for people that haven't experienced homelessness to really think about, how this interview might be affecting that other person.
Yeah. Broadcast news, they're setting up a live remote at 5 a.m. in front of a tent encampment and they're getting rocks thrown at them. And my response was, if you're in the Pacific Palisades or any nice neighborhood and you're setting up a live remote in front of somebody's house, they'd call the cops on you, right? Homeless people aren't going to call the cops on you. And so you just have to think about it as respect, because if you were setting up in the Pacific Palisades or whatever, you would respect that person's house. And I know not everybody thinks about it as it's their home, but it's the only space they have. And you have to respect that.
Mm-hmm. It's absolutely their space. And times when I've gone really early in the morning too, I think, and I know that maybe I'm disturbing, if they are awake and moving around again, like you want to be really transparent about what you're doing. Here's my goal. If you were a TV reporter, maybe you say, I'm not trying to get you in my shot, like just being really upfront, because people who live on the street have really difficult lives and often they can be a little paranoid, but rightfully so, because things have happened that have made them that way. And so you need to go in and recognize like a reaction that somebody has might not just be about the situation here. It might be because they were violated in some other way. And so just go in knowing that and be willing to kind of work with them. So sometimes I've been out maybe with a photographer and somebody said, I don't want to be photographed. And we'll say, okay, we are not going to photograph you. Can we photograph your feet maybe, but not you? Like having these conversations and just being extremely transparent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is an important conversation. In Invisible People, which is a little different, I always go up and I give a pair of socks and it starts the conversation. In today's world, it's often hard to tell if somebody is homeless, especially if you're like in a cold weather area. Everybody's got a backpack. Everybody's got a winter coat. They're walking around. I was a case manager. And 80% of my clients did not look, homeless, stereotypical homeless by giving socks. If somebody said, get out of here, right? A homeless person's going to go, wow, thank you. Only once I was in Times Square and there was a TV guy that had been working 24 hours. He goes, yeah, I want the socks. Then the second thing that I do is I try to find something to connect with this person. And what I mean is it could be a song on their Bluetooth speaker. It could be their hat, could be a necklace, could be a shirt, could be something. I might not even think it's that great, but I try to compliment them. Man, I really like your shirt. That is really awesome. And then we start on a conversation. Then I start going into informed consent. I'm going to explain to them how their story is going to be used explicitly. Now, I go a step further. I hand them a business card with all my contact information, which they probably lose. And I explain to them how they can find me on the internet, but on the business card is a link to our online support group. And many of the people I've connected with out on the streets, I now am connected to online. But that's kind of my protocol. And I think the most important there is the informed consent.
And I think that's like, I just love the idea of this online forum that they're connecting with after they meet you on the street. Yeah. And I would say I try to do a lot of that too. So if I'm doing a story and somebody's going to be a significant source in it, I just did a project about homeless hospital patients. I really tried to talk through with the two patients that I focused on the most, who had phone numbers that I could stay in touch with. And I, had gotten their medical records and things to review. I really tried to be very transparent with them about, this is what this means. Are you still in for this? And there were challenges at times staying in touch. There were times that we fell out of touch or had trouble getting in touch. And in one of the instances, I ended up talking to an advocate who's like, this person would say has saved their life. So I was able to talk to her at least and convey, okay, like there aren't any updates since I last talked to him. Here's what's in it. So if you talk to him first, you want to keep doing that throughout, because for us, like, these are stories or videos that we're posting, but for these people, it's their lives. And so they want to know if there's going to be a story talking about their personal information or experiences, they need to know that.
You, at the event we were at, you shared a story of a family. So I'll let you tell the story, because I thought it was unique in several ways.
So actually, we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of when I first heard from Natalie Raschke. Natalie was a mother of 4, and she and her husband ended up falling into homelessness. She, at that point, when she was reaching out, during COVID, they were living in their RV, and it's a long story. I won't get into the whole story. You can find it on voiceofsandiego.org, of course. Their RV had been towed, and this changed their experience of homelessness quite dramatically. They were living in a van that they got soon after that. Sometimes they were in hotels, but it really impacted their stability. And she was just so upset. They had been reaching out to the mayor and not hearing anything. And, they had 4 kids in there at that time. I think they were ages 4 to 15. So big range of children. And this was like really affecting their lives pretty significantly. And so Natalie reached out to me via email. I think it was Super Bowl Sunday, 2022, and basically said, I want to tell my kids' stories. Like, they matter. They have faces. And she just felt like the city was just ignoring them and making their lives so much worse, and ignoring the reality of what, these tickets and other things they were receiving meant for them. And so I ended up having a conversation with her. We got on a call, I believe it was the following week or soon after. And I talked to her about, this experience is really interesting. And I was very upfront with her about, I don't know where this is going to lead, but I'm interested. And how would you feel about if I were to write about your family? And we walked through a bit, like, what would that mean? So, like, I would probably want to have a photographer with me. I would probably want to tell the story of this tow that happened and how it impacted you, and tell your whole story. And, I'd be probably following you around a bit. And after multiple conversations and, her just saying she remained interested in it, we ended up getting together. I think it wasn't actually until early April of 2022, just because of a lot of things happening for both of us. Obviously, her family had a lot going on. We met up actually outside a tow yard, so we could go see the RV together. And I brought a photographer along, and we had a lot of conversations then too about what they felt comfortable with. Ultimately, they decided they didn't want straight on photos of the 2 older children, since, they're kind of at a different point in their lives than the 2 youngest. But I ended up following the Raschke family for a few months, and it was a really interesting experience, because I think a lot of times reporters feel this. It's difficult sometimes when you see that someone's really struggling, and we have to remember what our role is. So I can remember there was one night where the kids were just so hungry, and it was taking Natalie a really long time to cook dinner. She had a little skillet out. It was just so hard for them. One of the challenges that they had after they lost the RV was they couldn't buy food in bulk, so they couldn't keep things refrigerated, and they lost some of their various cooking supplies and things too. So it would just take them so long to cook, and they couldn't buy as much. And of course, food for a family of 6 is not cheap, right? The oldest son, he was a high school athlete, and he was just so hungry. And I remember he wolfed down his chicken that, his mom had made for him. And he was just so hungry after that. And it just took so much self-restraint for me not to like just go to the store right after that and just bring food over. But I recognized that I needed to try to witness this and write about it. And that was the most important role. And I might have more of an impact if I could keep from kind of getting involved. Although ultimately, the story did end up having quite an impact for them. When it came time that it was closer to publish the story in June of 2022, I ended up, again, having the conversation with the family about photos, making sure everybody's still on the same page that this is a thing that they want to move forward with. And when I had a draft that was ready to go, I actually read it in full to Natalie, which is not something I do with every story. I want to be clear. I don't do that with every story. But in this case, it was her family's story. And I wanted to make sure that she felt that I got it right. Although, sometimes people get frustrated with something in a story. I don't necessarily change it if that's what the fact is. But I also just felt like I didn't want her to be surprised. Yeah. This is her story, so she shouldn't be surprised about anything that's in it. And it was such a relief, after I read that story to her, she said it was spot on and she was ready for this. And we published the story. It ended up getting a really dramatic response. Lots of people wanted to help. Some pretty powerful people too reached out wanting to help. And the family ended up getting a housing voucher. And there was a lot more effort through the local housing agency to get them housing, to help them find a place, which had been a real challenge. So they'd been trying and just not making a lot of progress because the market's so tough and they have a big family. I guess one thing I want to acknowledge too with this, whenever I tell this story, it still has been tough for my team in some ways when we write stories like this, because we kind of feel like this family won the lottery. There are lots of other families. And I know this is something I've talked to Natalie about as well, that she's continuing to volunteer and do things for the homeless community, but she feels kind of like there are lots of others as well that needed help. Of course, she's so relieved that her family did get help and that they're off the street, not parking on the street anymore, not moving in and out of hotels all the time. But, we still think about what about everybody else?
You can tell how powerful that story and experience was for you. And it must have been extremely hard, because I've been in similar situations where you don't want to be the story yourself. You don't want to intervene no matter how hard it is. And sometimes I'll go back, or it's after, while you're doing that, how do you take care of Lisa?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
That's a work in progress too. I will say I'm a big advocate for therapy. One thing that I have learned is I need to make sure that there's space for me to talk about how I feel about the things that I see. And I actually, this was early last year, I got into a free therapy program for journalists, which was great because I was able to just kind of talk about coping skills. But I think that's the biggest thing that I tell other reporters is you have feelings when you go out and do these tough stories, and you need to have a place that you can unload as well. And sometimes it's hard. I will say it can be really difficult on these topics because a lot of people have strong opinions about this stuff and they don't necessarily understand. And so you might get some lectures from people who know less about the topic than you do, when you try to express your own vulnerability. So you do need to make sure that when you are confiding in people, that you're confiding in the right people, that you're really being thoughtful about, okay, can this person, I think sometimes is this person built for this? Can they handle this thing? Because sometimes the thing that I've seen, they're having a really tough time with some other stuff in their life, and they're not going to be able to be present and hear that. One thing that is very much in common with you and Kate, you both have stellar reputation on the street. So how important is that? Because I think as we go into this ever polarizing world that's getting crazier and crazier, misinformation, I believe that the reputation, is that reporter honest? Is that reporter known for misinformation? And you guys have very good street cred
which is a huge compliment, right? I see all the time people talking about how awesome you are.
Well, thank you. I love hearing that, and I hope I can maintain it, because I will say it's takes some work. I think the transparency is huge. Being really transparent about what you're trying to do, not just showing up sometimes. I think part of the trust that I've built is that I've been doing this for a while. So I'm not new to this, and I've spent time on the street. So this also goes, I would say, for some service providers too. They'll say, you've been out here, you've gone out with our teams, you've, seen what it's like. And so some reporters might be just sitting at their desks all the time, but you actually hit the streets and come talk to us. I think that matters. And also just, sometimes it does get difficult. I'll say, like, we get really busy, we get a lot of emails and text messages and things. And I do just try to respond and see people. I don't always get back to everybody like I'd like to, but just some sort of response to acknowledge, I think, can be really important for building trust too. And just saying, I'm really busy right now, but I see you. What you're describing sounds like it really sucks. Because I do think that a lot of times with this population, they just do not feel seen and acknowledged. And so, as a reporter, kind of taking that as part of my role is like, just like I am in the rest of the universe, right? Is like, if you see somebody seems to be having a bad day, just kind of acknowledge them. You see a source on the street or whatever, maybe you're standing with the mayor, but you still say hi to that source. Those little things matter a lot.
Yeah, they definitely do. How long have you been reporting on homelessness and related topics, and what have you seen change both in homelessness and how to cover homelessness?
So I have been writing about homelessness since late 2015. So it's been a while.
Wow.
It's crazy that it's been that long. I would say as lots changed, and frankly, like, things have changed with my approach too. I think I've become a lot more trauma informed, just in terms of recognizing the trauma of the people that I'm often talking to. And again, like, I want to restate this. I think I said this before. I say this a lot, but like, often what somebody's doing is not about you. And I think that that's just so important for people to recognize. And that's like kind of a touchstone for me too. And the work that I do too is sometimes people are just going through a really tough time, and maybe they're kind of mean to you, but it's really not about something that you've done in that moment. Or, maybe they don't want to talk to you. Maybe they've had a bad experience with another reporter, but you just keep showing up. In terms of what's changed too, I think there has been a greater recognition of the importance of this beat. When I first started, there wasn't really a reporter that was solely their beat. Gary Horvath, who retired from the Union Tribune recently, he had actually, last night I saw him in an event, and he was talking about how he had gone to his editor. This was years ago, way before I was covering homelessness. And he said, hey, could I make this part of my beat? And his editor at the time was kind of like, why would you want to do that? And, lo and behold, that became, toward the latter part of his career, his beat. And so I would say too, that sort of happened with me too. Like, for a while, it was like a piece of what I did, it kind of started as a thread for me to pull on. But what we recognized is, wow, there's a lot of interest in this. So I still do write about other things, but that's really probably where I spend the majority of my time now. And I think with that too has come a little bit more respect for the beat in terms of the journalism that comes from it. I think in the past, sometimes it was viewed as sort of like sob stories or like soft stuff, but as you and I both know, it's a hard beat. It's very complex, and there's a lot of room for investigative stories. I think in terms of the ecosystem, I mean, certainly there's been more of a push for punitive measures to address homelessness, more divisiveness around what the right approach is, which is kind of reflective of our broader political climate right now. And that's hard to cover. I was just talking to somebody about that the other day too, that sometimes it can be really hard as a journalist, because maybe, we can't have opinions about what the right approach is, but we're people too, and we care about our communities. And sometimes we see, oh, actually, like, enforcement as a standalone approach really isn't the most effective based on, lots of evidence over the years. Also just seeing, when maybe there was seeming to be some different groups kind of coalescing behind a certain thing, that at least something's going to happen. And then you see them being like butting heads and disagreeing, which certainly as journalists, we write about that. Have to be agnostic about what the solution is, but I'm also human and I do like to see humans get housed.
Okay, our favorite topic, probably the most controversial.
Ooh, I know what this is.
I know you know. Homeless, unhoused, or people experiencing homelessness?
Homeless.
Homeless. Why?
Because that is what homeless people want to be called. And when most of the time when I talk to them, that is what they say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do sprinkle in, like full disclosure, I'll sprinkle in unsheltered, I'll sprinkle in unhoused.
Yeah.
But my headline is always going to be homeless.
And it's really interesting because housed people, the most popular phrase is unhoused. That has even now gone to politicians. Unhoused has even been written into criminalization laws, police, NIMBYs. Homeless people, it's homeless. Most homeless people say homeless. Academics like to say people experiencing homelessness. For me, if somebody likes to say they're structurally challenged, which I run into somebody that, no, I'm structurally challenged, that's what I refer to them. If they want to say unhoused, I will say unhoused. But my number one is, what do homeless people prefer? And that's the term homeless. Number two, it's the word as communicators that most people communicate. Although I am the same way. We're starting to use unhoused a little more. If you look at Google search, like unhoused is growing in search, but most people still use homeless. It's all really stupid to me. I mean, it's interesting in a way how this is all evolving, but I think from the context of our conversation, journalists are struggling with what should we say? Because there's like the unhoused stormtroopers, like, you can't say homeless. They're like, what?
Well, and then you have editors, to your point too, because I've had conversations with editors. Well, do people know what that is? Or I've also had emails like, why are you using unhoused?
Yeah.
What's that? What? And then like having, oh, is that a political thing? And I do think we need to go with what people are going to understand. But yeah, I've definitely been subject of some social media, mentions of I should use unhoused.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it what it is about housed people that they're so adamant about using unhoused when homeless people don't even use it. Anyways, I could talk to you forever. Is there anything that you would like to add that I might have missed, reporting on homelessness or engaging with homeless people?
Oh, man. It's a big topic. One thing I would say is that don't underestimate how difficult it is to do these stories. They're very complicated. And I know historically homelessness, like I said, was kind of like this, oh, like that's not a priority beat, but it's really complicated, whether it's, trying to track down the dollars and cents around spending, politicians and leaders disagreeing on the right approaches, connecting with unsheltered people and like seeing like the realities of their lives and then going home and maybe feeling some things when you get home too about what your role is. That's all normal to feel a little overwhelmed with sometimes. And I think we need to, as journalists, when we're doing those stories, figure out how to communicate that to our editors and other people that we work with as well. Sometimes that, when these stories get hard or have somebody that we can confide in, I guess I would say, I do think that, beyond this, there probably needs to be more training and community building among journalists who write about homelessness to try to help establish some best practices.
Because it's important. While you were saying it's challenging because you're dealing with a complicated topic and you're dealing with complicated people, politicians, see what I did there? At the end of the day, you're influencing change somewhere and you're capturing important stories.
Yes. And that is one thing. That's one reason to be on this beat. I will say that the work that I have done on this beat, I do feel like sometimes like this is what I was born to do because this is where I've had the most impact and I'm able to have a positive impact on my community, and sometimes that's just by being really annoying at a press conference, and just asking that tough question. And I'll get a text message. I've had this happen before where, maybe somebody else was at a press conference, or maybe it's somebody that works in the field or whatever, and they'll send me a text and say, thank you for pushing on that. You were asking the right questions. Or homeless people will know, because actually during COVID, one thing I did, and actually this is another tip to build trust with sources, I would actually post my interviews about topics that I knew were of interest. So like, for example, during COVID, there was a lot of interest. People really wanted to get hotel rooms because they were really scared about COVID. Obviously many homeless people have health conditions and were very worried about what it would mean to get sick. And so I was getting all these questions about how to get hotels. So every time I would have a conversation or like ask questions at one of the county press conferences, I would transcribe that interview and I would just post it on social media so they could see my back and forth, and they could see the follow-up question that I asked, and they could see a lot of times the politician didn't answer, but they could see my persistence. I've heard a lot from people who work in homeless services and also who are homeless themselves, that they can see that persistence, that I just keep following up and coming back even when it's uncomfortable. And that definitely will build support, because you might have some cheerleaders cheering you on instead of just a politician yelling back at you.
Well, I could talk to you forever. I thank you for joining me in this conversation, and I hope it's the beginning of many more.
Me too. Thanks for asking me to do this.
This podcast was amazing. Please leave a review, please share, and if you can, I know things are tight, visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our work has never been more important, and we're powered by you.